Hi everyone, this is Caly. Thanks so much for joining me today. I am excited to share a project using the Greetery's Shortbread Shapes Snowflake products. The coordinating products for this bundle includes the Shortbread Shapes Snowflake embossing folder as well as a coordinating Shortbread Shapes Snowflake dies. This is a large embossing folder sized for 5x7 cards or A7, and as you can see, it's very detailed. And what's great about the die set is that it cuts out to layer all of these pieces to arrange a really pretty platter of snowflake shaped cookies. And there's also detailed dies that you can use too to add additional details to your die cut or even to cut the shortbread cookies apart. So for the cookies, I'm going to use an ivory colored cardstock, and then for this large piece, I'm going to call it the platter. I'm going to die cut it from a soft powder blue. So you'll start to see here how they layer, and for the outermost edge, I'm going to use white cardstock, and we'll be embossing this 3 times, one with each panel that I've die cut. Each layer is going to be carefully centered inside the embossing folder so that I can get a good impression all the way around, making sure I get all the details of the embossed space. Embossing the full-size panel is not a big deal, but once you get to these smaller shaped areas, you want to make sure that you line it up just perfectly before you close the embossing folder to run it through your embossing machine, making sure that you get all the little details for that specific platter image. And then I'll do the same for the star. I'll just shimmy it around until I get the perfect position for it before I close the embossing folder to emboss the shortbread cookie portion. Okay, so now I have all 3 layers embossed. I'm going to add color with inking. With a very soft hand, I like to ink blend softly and then add more color if I need to. So I am going to go all the way around the outer edges first and then kind of blend in towards each of the snowflake edges so that I can go in towards the cookie. I know it's a little hard to see, but each cookie is defined by score lines or indentations. And we're going to end up die cutting that later, but I really wanted to add some depth and dimension to this piece before I die cut those little lines into it. So I'm going to go all the way around, and when I'm done kind of intensifying those score lines, I'm also adding some brown color to all of the snowflakes on each cookie. I'll repeat the same process for this powder blue. I'm going around the outer edges with the ink color to coordinate with this blue cardstock and just going over the embossed areas a little bit to intensify and bring those details to life. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to use the residual ink on this blue brush and just ink blend the corners of this white panel. It's kind of like the casting of the color from the platter going onto the countertop, if you want to imagine this as a 3D object. Now, to further bring out the details of the embossed areas on these cookies, I'm using a small brayer here and running some white pigment ink over those areas. You could apply direct to paper, and I'll do that later with the platter. Doesn't matter, it's kind of up to you what method you prefer and how clean you like the embossed areas to be with the white. And to intensify that, I'm going to be adding white embossing powder over those embossed areas that have been applied with ink so that I can heat emboss this and get those white embossed areas to look like cookies that have been iced with white icing. I'm going to heat set that and make sure that everything is dry because next we're going to use the coordinating die to die cut all of these little cookies by using the die that will cut slits into all of the cookies. Now, if you want the cookies to be individual so that you can lay them out on a card individually, you can do that by snipping them apart. This just die cuts so that it makes it look a little bit more defined but keeps the cookies together, and that's how I want to keep it. But as you can see here, adding that die cut detail gives it so much more definition. And speaking of definition, I feel like it needs more brown on it, so I'm going to ink blend a bit more to intensify those details further. So I'm doing the same thing that I did initially, just adding more ink to make sure that those cookies stand out a bit more than they did before. I'm running the ink along the outer edges as well as on those score marks to separate each of those cookies. Now at this point, I thought I wanted to add a bit more detail. How fun would it be if these cookies look like they had sugar on them? So I am going to use some glossy accents or a clear lacquer adhesive and just add them on the white areas that have been embossed so they're raised like they have icing on them as well as sprinkled sugar. So I did the inner star first, and I decided I'm also going to do each of the snowflakes on all of those cookies. So I'll go around and add little dabs of glue, running them along the spine of all of the snowflakes, and then sprinkling on some clear glass glitter here, and then tapping the excess away, and then setting this piece aside to dry. This small detail is an extra step, but it's not a whole lot of work, and it's so worth it to get the effect that you're looking for with trying to bring a paper cookie to life. Now with the platter, I'm going to apply that white ink directly to the platter piece. I could have used the brayer again, but I thought I'd show you that it's okay to apply directly to the cardstock and just kind of shimmy the ink pad once it hits the surface just a little bit to get that ink to go all the way around all the embossed areas. Now you'll get some ink on the non-embossed areas too, but I'm not too worried about that because I kind of like the way that it looks, especially after I emboss it. Now if you don't want to emboss it, you can definitely skip the embossing powder and just directly heat set it or set it aside to air dry. I'm just going to emboss it now with my heat tool and set that embossing powder, bringing additional details to life again. And like I said, you're going to get some white areas on the platter and ink on areas that aren't raised, but that's okay. It kind of reminds me of clay pottery that is painted, and it's never perfect, so it kind of makes it look a little bit more organic. Now to assemble my platter of cookies, I'm going to be adding some thin 3D foam squares to the back of each layer and then adding it on top of one another. This adds so much dimension to the card, and I just love the embossing throughout. To decorate this card, I'm going to be using the Regency Bow No. 1 dies. This die set contains a bow design in 2 different sizes, and I'm going to be using the larger die to die cut a pink bow that I'm also going to ink blend to give it some more shading and interest. I've also die cut 2 extra tails so that we can make this bow look a little bit fuller, and I'm not adding ink throughout. I'm specifically focusing adding color in areas that I think would overlap with other pieces of the bow, and then that just creates a little bit more interest and some depth and dimension here and there as the bow curves and curls. Assembling the bow is super easy. I'm just going to layer this loopy piece right over that larger bow, and that's just going to go right on top, and it looks like it already creates the different layers of the bow, looping up higher than the previous bow. And then I'll add the tails behind that, kind of changing the direction just slightly, offsetting it so that it looks a little bit more interesting. To finish with the bow, I'm just going to add a little dot of glue at the center of the bow and then apply that last piece on the center. Then I'm going to use a little 3D foam square behind the bow's center and then center this at the top of my platter where the cookies begin. For the sentiment, I'm using a greeting from the Capsule Collection Holiday Borders stamp set. I'm going to stamp a simple one that says Merry Christmas, and to make it more interesting, I'm going to use the same pink colors and give the sentiment an ombre look. I'm going to stamp first with a lighter pink, and then using a sponge dauber, I'm going to apply some darker ink towards the bottom where it says Christmas, and not going all the way up the letters, just at the bottom, and then it creates this nice ombre look. I'm going to fussy cut that, and then to give it more interest, I'm going to apply a bit more glue or clear glue and then sprinkle some glitter on this sentiment as well before I add some 3D foam squares on this and apply it to the bottom of my platter. Once the sentiment is in place, all I have to do is apply some adhesive onto the back and adhere this card panel to a card base. And that finishes my Shortbread Shapes Snowflake card. I hope you enjoyed this video. I had so much fun putting it together for you. If you're interested in any of the products that I use, be sure to check out the links below where everything will be linked for your convenience. Thank you so much for stopping by and have a wonderful day. Bye everyone!